Gentlemen, we would like to get started. First, I'd like to thank Bill Roth for conducting our service this morning. Bill, thanks so much. Second, on a sick call, I don't see Dave Schwartz here. I know he was in the hospital, and I know Larry Nadelson had been in the hospital. Anybody else that we know of that is kind of on sick call? Okay. I'd like to thank Ed Silver for bailing us out on getting coffee for us. Ed has a tendency to bail us out on a number of things.
The coffee is ready now.
And the coffee is ready. We started something new a couple months back where we have our table captains ask their table. Guys, we have our table captains come up with a question to ask of our potential new guests. So I'm going to just have our table captains come up with a question for, in this case, it'll be Bob. Okay. Art, would you start us off? We're not ready yet. Which table captain has a question ready? Here we go. Sure. We're going to put you on the hot seat.
Myron Kessler, I'd like to welcome Bob here, and I'd like to find out about his theatrical antics.
Oh, yeah, I can take the microphone.
Yeah, you have to talk.
I think you probably hear me without the microphone, so. As opposed to that? I can't stand to hear my own voice off of that. My name is Bob Castle. I'm a guest of Ned Goldmash. He asked, it sort of came about that I think I am meant to be a potential speaker, at least in Ned's mind. My area of interest is film, and various aspects of film, directors, history in movies. I've also write a lot about film. I have a column in the Collins Patch, a blog, which is about once a week, where I can write about anything. So just in the past, and the articles are my interests. People like Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick. I write occasionally about actors. Lee Marvin, I would say an expert on. And I think I'm actually called an expert on Stanley Kubrick. I was part of a series where I gave an interview, and I was part of the 2001 Space Odyssey part of the series, and on YouTube, there's like the hour-long interview with me, which I often listen to, just amazed at how I could have answered questions without knowing the questions ahead of time and actually be somewhat articulate.
And we'll let you save all the rest for when you speak. How's that?
And I'm also on a DVD as an extra for the team.
Art, do you have a question for our other potential member, Bob?
Okay. Bob, where did you, it's a little more generic question, where did you grow up and go to school?
My name is Robert Bliss. Thank you for welcoming me. In fact, I gave a check-in already. So I know Jerry Riepstein. I don't know whether that's an asset or not, but so be it. I'm married, a bunch of kids, grandkids. I live in an over 55 community. I'm a pharmacist. I still work a little bit. I'm still pretty active physically. So I grew up in Southwest Philadelphia. Moved to New Jersey when I went into business. I owned a pharmacy in Pennsauken for 25 years. Now I work for part-time for the casinos in Atlantic City. They fill prescriptions for casino employees only. So it's a good fun job, a couple days a week. And went to John Bartram High School and Philadelphia College of Pharmacy.
Great.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you. I think he covered it pretty well, so we're going to move on. We'll say that the captains could save those questions they had for the next meeting. Okay, finance report. Ed, can you give us a brief update?
Well,
Where are
we're
we?
in the process of collecting dues, of course, and we've collected, I guess, about maybe half the members, so there's going to probably be an email going out this week to those who haven't paid yet and probably haven't been here. And then we'll have a formal bill go out if we don't get a response to the, we're looking to collect all the dues here in the next 30 days.
Is that what we're calling Lindsay now, a formal bill?
We also have a budget prepared, which is going to go before the next board meeting and be approved for the year that just started. Other than that, I think
Great,
pretty much it.
thank you. Ed's been doing a great job with that. Membership. Dick, where are you?
Collecting my 2020 Christmas video.
You're not going to win, so don't worry about getting the tickets.
I have to tell you, I have.
But come on up, come on up.
Oh, all right.
I'll hold that so you.
Couple of things. I just want to welcome all the new potential members and those who have, Bob, thanks for affiliate. Thanks. Am I supposed to eat this thing? Yeah. Thanks for joining us. And Mr. Baker, thank you for joining. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. And anyone else who wants to join, by all means. And by the way, thanks to Dr. Nidoff here, Dave, we now have a new application that's up to date. Shows some of the more recent activities we've done. And I want to thank him again profusely. He's a good doctor besides that.
His application starts with the word dispense.
Dispense, right. Dispense. Very good. What else? Let's see. Oh, survey has, one of the other things we're trying to do is find out what activities you guys are interested in, legitimate activities or illegitimate. And we're pretty well done with the survey, but there's still people that haven't completed. If you haven't done so, I have extra copy. Anybody here hasn't done the survey? We have the JAG survey and then we have the member survey. So has anyone not filled out a form?
By the way, the JAG survey is Jewish Athletic Group.
Yeah, sorry,
It's more of the
Jewish.
sports end.
Right, sorry. And so if you haven't filled it out, please do so and return it to moi. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dick. Did I see, is Glenn Berman here today? No. Okay, well, club recognition. We hope to have new name tags. Jerry is also working on that. And then we would use the old name tags to be worn. You take those home and you could wear them when you come to an event. Again, we're trying to increase our club recognition. When we go to an activity, it'd be nice if people knew we were there. So we're also going to be purchasing the remainder of the sports T-shirts from Barry Rosenberg that we're going to hand out. Mike had offered to do that, to collect them. And when we have something like the Sukkah building, it's nice that people know we're there and contributing. We're not a fundraising group. We're a service organization, but it's really nice that when we do something, it's recognized. Dave, I'm going to ask Dave when to come up. Dave will be covering a number of topics, and as soon as I turn the page here,
Let me know what topics.
I'll you hold that so I could.
I'll start off.
Okay, go ahead.
The first thing that I want to talk about is our next month's meeting, which is the first meeting we're going to be having that's going to be completely different from this. And that is because we're committed now to helping the JCC with the Arts, Books, and Cultural Festival. Next month, instead of the last Sunday in the month, we're going to be meeting on the 17th of the month, which is the third Sunday. And our meeting is going to be completely different from this. We are going to be preparing food, not for ourselves, but for the Arts, Books, and Cultural Festival. And we will be selling tickets to our people at the same price to attend that. Now, it's going to be $10 or more for people from the outside. It's going to be that much for us. What we will be doing is we're going to be coming in at 8:30 and working, and my wife is going to be there kind of doing things, which it's interesting, as I just mentioned, we have to cut scallions a certain way to make them kosher according to this gear. I have no idea what that is. But she's going to be working with us, and she has worked with us for the Middle East Institute before. So we're going to be working from 8:30 to 10. We will then have a business meeting from 10 to, let's say, about 10:45. And then we go back downstairs to the kitchen. The first part of the day is the kitchen. And then load all the stuff that we've made into a display trays and things like that, and put it out on buffet tables. That's going to have to be done between 11:45 and a little bit before, 10:45 and 11:30, because the doors open at 11:30, and the food is going to be available to all the people who attend that, including us. Now, what we will need is we will need people to work in the kitchen. Oh, before that, pick up the bagels, and Marty Raffner has agreed to pick up the bagels. Then we work in the kitchen. Then we come to the meeting, and at the meeting, we will sell tickets to the event. $7, the same as usual, and Ed Stein has agreed to collect the money for those tickets. We will get the tickets, and whatever we don't sell, we give the tickets back, and $7 for each ticket that's been sold. And then we can go to the meeting, eat the food, and then attend the meeting. The meeting should be very interesting. The first speaker is Matt Goldberg, who I know from the past. He's a good guy. He also happens to pitch for the McCoy Shalom team. And for 1 year, we had the McCoy Shalom team participating with us. So I actually pitched for South Jersey Men's Club for 1 year. He will be speaking on Jewish sports heroes of Philadelphia. Following that, there's going to be 2 other speakers. One is going to be talking about music of the Second World War, which is my era, and maybe some of the older people here will find that it's going to be their era too. And then finally, there will be a speaker on the Holocaust. And Mike has given me a finger, so please stick it where it hurts most.
First World War.
No, the Second World War. Not ragtime, but good jazz, good pop music, the old standards. So I have a thing here which lists the 4 items, and 2 items have already been taken, but we need volunteers to work in the kitchen. We need volunteers for the move the trays from the kitchen to the social hall where the meeting is going to be held. Hopefully people will sign in. All you have to do is, I've got at the top the list of the 4 items, and put an X in if you're willing to do this. I'm going to put it at the table over here. Give it to Barney first, or go around the table. When you're finished, please give it to another table. And hopefully we can get enough volunteers today, and then I'm going to have Randy try and get more. Okay. Now,
Let me just follow up with that.
Sure.
It's really important. I think, we have a real good rapport with the JCC, and this is a win-win, I think, for both of us. We get in their speakers. We might not be getting quite the same breakfast that we're accustomed to. It'll be a little bit more scaled down, but it's good to have favorable relations with them, since we meet here, and it's that old saying, one hand washes the other. So I really hope that we'll get people out and participate and enjoy the speakers. Dick, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say, speaking of relations with the JCC, Marcy Lahab was instrumental in getting us to run off copies of our applications. So they really help out in all kinds of ways.
And they're also going to, if I'm correct, they're also going to be receiving our mail for us now, so we can save the cost of not having a post office box, which is also very favorable.
Will we have access to the shirts for that meeting?
I'll try to get in touch with Barry. He said he would be at the next, Barry Rosenberg would be at the next meeting, and Mike had offered originally to disseminate the shirts and collect them. So we'll try to do that. I think that's a real good idea. I'll follow up with Barry. If he can't get them to us, I'll find a way to pick them up and get them to Mike.
I was just thinking along the lines you were discussing our cooperation with the JCC. I was wondering if we can think ahead a little bit. Is there something we can do with regard to the Maccabi, which they're gearing up for next August? Can we help out in some fashion? that would make a difference.
Who should we talk to?
Perhaps Marcy, I'd speak to Les.
Because Rob Kiwi seems to be the top guy.
Yeah, I don't think they've appointed a staff person. They will have a staff person on this pretty much full-time.
Do you know who that is?
Not yet, I don't think they've made that decision.
Okay, because last time I did work, I was the person that drove around the mascot from event to event. And I certainly will be glad to help out. I'm sure some of the guys here would be glad to help out. If we have maybe one point of contact that contacts us and gives us the options of what kind of activity we can be doing.
That's going to be a huge thing on their calendar.
Yeah. So
Okay, well, we
can you get that to
certainly
us?
look into it. We're not opposed.
Can you get that name to us?
Yeah, once it's been decided.
Great. When?
They're not even close to having any type of organizational
But they're getting there.
structure.
They're getting there.
But this is a great event because we have kids coming in from all over the country, participating in a lot of sporting events. I wish JAG would be interested, but they're probably not. But I can talk to them about that too.
One of the big things they'll be looking for is housing kids for the
Okay.
5 days.
But if we can get that and some kind of thing, maybe if we can get it for a board meeting, meeting next month, it would be great. Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, we helped out the last time they had it here about 5 years ago.
More than that, more than that.
Well, anyway,
1999.
okay, maybe what?
My teacher said 1999.
Okay. I haven't looked at my T-shirt in a while. But Kathy was the person who was coordinating it as part of the staff.
Yeah, if Barney can get that name for us.
Thank you
I'm
for
sure he
bringing
can.
it up, though.
And I'm sure we will. While we're talking about sports, there is an event that was held this year, first time here, actually it was not held here, it was supposed to be held here, but not enough interest among the various conservative synagogues was involved. It was called the Tour de Shul. It was an event that started last year with a bicycle ride around the various synagogues on the western side of Philadelphia. They tried to do one here this year, and it didn't work because there wasn't that much interest. But one of our people, Alan Finkelstein, went over to the other side of the river and rode over there. And we sponsored him, and we got a nice thank you for him, saying, I want to personally thank the board for its generous donation and support when I participated in Tour de Shul bike ride. Thanks to the members who made individual contributions. Now, this is going to be an annual event, so hopefully next year it'll be a little bit more organized on this side of the river, maybe have more riders, and certainly this is something that we support because the money goes to Camp Ramah in the Poconos, which we've supported for many years through many other mechanisms. So we hope to continue doing that in the future. Anything else for me, Sam? Anything else for me?
Yes. Want to do the sucker report?
Oh, yeah. Now, we did the sukkah, and Bob Greenberg is probably sorry he did that, but we both put it up and took it down. And when we started talking about taking it down, we didn't think Bob was going to be taken down. He was on a ladder, and he was reaching, I believe, for something, and he reached too far and fell. And Bob took it in the body pretty tough for a while. But you okay now, Bob?
Getting there.
Okay, glad to hear that. Now, a sukkah is what P.T. Barnum said, there's a sukkah born every minute. The one that was right out front of the JCC here, which is called the Community Sukkah, where we could have all kinds of events. We could have had a meeting there. But Don and I wore our T-shirts that we were talking about using to the other events, and so hopefully other people will have those shirts and make them available and use them and clearly identify who we are. Anything else?
I think you got it all. Okay. And we did award Bob an 8 for his fall. Just an 8.
An 8?
He landed back first. If he would have went head first, it would have been a 10, but we're really glad that he's all right. He did give us a bit of a scare there.
If I landed head first, I would be out of there.
Okay, Mike Perloff, would you speak on the Holocaust Museum? I know you brought calendars and something else. Pocket calendars and regular calendars.
Hockey calendar? Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, good morning. And in conclusion,
Everybody, put your phones away.
what we have is, again, we have the Jewish calendars for next year. And on your tables, we have the cards with the Jewish holidays for 2014, which I don't know about you, but I have found them to be quite useful in planning events or even deciding on when to go out and different things. So make sure you get one of those. The calendars, you can take more than one if you need one for a family member or one at home, one at work. What's work? That's it about the calendars. The other thing is that the Holocaust Education Center here, for many years we've been a supporter of it, both sweat equity and donations, and we are, I believe, the first organization to be a lifetime member, and which was followed by the Jewish war vets. And at the time, I believe one of our members was commander of the South Jersey Post. The other thing about it is we support the Holocaust Education Center with Yom HaShoah candles from the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs. We are part of the Middle Atlantic region of the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, and we have won more awards than almost any other synagogue men's club in North America. And just a very, very few are always on display. We have some over here. And that's about it. Any questions? Thank you.
I think I had one, you want to mention the mentionable?
Newsletter. Thank you. For many years, we had a newsletter called The Mensch, and we need somebody to step up and to help put it together. The old ones were printed up every I think it was about 4 times a year. And now we'll be able to just put it online. But we need someone to just take the information that others will give you about different activities and and put it together in some kind of program. Several people will be glad to help. So if you even have the slightest inkling that you'd be able to do this, please let me know, or Don.
It's called an editor.
That's what we need, an editor. Was that also a volunteering on your part?
I can only spell it. I don't do it.
Okay. Ned, can you give us any update on the JFCS? Is there anything that you...
I have no information about it, but there was about 7 volunteers for the pantry thing on September 15th, and basically they collected enough food for 300 people, 300 families actually in the Camden County and Burlington County area, and they did humongous work, and I want to thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you, Ned. Also, let me drop down a little bit here, just a quick fantasy football report. Those guys that are involved with fantasy football are, all the feedback I'm getting is very, very good. Everybody's really enjoying it. I have to tell you that your president is, I'm not the best team. I really am not, but I am the luckiest team. I'm 7-0 in first place going into this week. But everybody's really having a good time, but I hope others will consider getting involved. And again, keep in mind the idea of this is to help us increase membership. You might know somebody that enjoys doing it. You might have a son, a son-in-law, a father, uncle. You know, they would all be welcome, and it's very reasonably cost. And I think, as I said, everybody's having a lot of fun. Also, Mike is reminding me, please bring in your kosher food, your cell phones, your eyeglasses, your toiletries. We collect those. Also books, music. I'm probably forgetting another one, but okay. So please bring those in. And as you can see, we do a lot of things, and it all adds up to a big picture of us helping the community. Okay, Ed, can you give us a report on JCRC? We're making Ed do a lot of duties today.
So I can do this. We'll give you double duty. You vote. Interestingly enough, we're talking about using our shirts for public activities so that people will know about the men's club. The JCRC at their last board meeting Tuesday was discussing the same issue. As you know, they run the Bookmates program with the Archdiocese, where they supply readers to the school system, and they work with first grade students in helping them learn to read and to appreciate books. But nobody knows who we are, so the JCRC is now talking about getting shirts also. The idea indirectly came from the men's club, I should say. There are a lot of activities the JCRC is now sponsoring. If you remember, we once had a speaker on Media Watch. I think Mike Perloff was instrumental in that. One of the speakers that's coming to the area on Tuesday, November 5th, and Randy, I'll give you all of these notices. Philip Karstensee, there was a film a couple years ago. Say it again? Kerensky. There was a film a couple years ago where they showed an Arab child being shot by Israeli soldiers, made a big stink against Israel. But there was a film made later where they showed the child getting up and walking away. Karstensee was, or however you pronounce his name, was very instrumental in creating an awareness of the influence of negative publicity against Israel. He's going to be speaking here in November. I'll make sure you get that notice. Also, on November 14th, a writer by the name of Daniel Jonah Goldhagen will be discussing his book, The Devil That Never Dies, The Rise and Threat of Global Anti-Semitism. That's also sponsored by the JCRC. That's going to be November 14th.
Part of the Arts, Books, and Culture.
Part of the Arts, Books, and Culture. And also part of the same culture, Thomas Harding is going to be presenting the true story of the German Jew who tracked down the commander of Auschwitz. That's going to be at 1:30 on November 10th as part of the Arts Books Festival. And you already got a notice about Israel advocacy, Thursday, November 21st. Neil Lazarus is going to present the 5 rules of effective Israeli advocacy. And Randy, I'll give them all to you, okay?
And I'm glad, Dave, I didn't see you earlier, but I'm glad to see you are here. Would you want to come up and introduce our speaker? I'm very glad Dave's had a little episode, and we're very glad to see him back.
Any more than 50, last chance for 50-50.
I'd like to thank everyone who chipped in to find a really talented speaker for today. I had Rabbi Address from the Core Shalom scheduled for today, and there was a mix-up in his scheduling, so he has been rescheduled for January. And again, thanks everyone who chipped in to get Ed. Ed Silver, a longtime member of our group, has agreed to speak today about couples issues.
Fair fighting.
Fair fighting. Close enough. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks.
Thanks.
No, I don't need that. A couple comments already from people who said, we've been married 30, 40 years, it's too late already. So maybe we'll be able to watch the film for your children or your grandchildren. In case some of you don't know, I have a mental health practice, and including in that practice is marriage counseling. And these are some of the rules that I've developed for the couples coming in to engage in couple counseling. When I was in training 900 years ago, I was required to take a one-day workshop with one of the most prominent marriage counselors in the day, Dr. Chaim Hagzoltz, and I was just to sit in and watch him as he did his work. And he interviewed a couple one at a time, and I was just supposed to observe him. So we spoke first to Mr. Jones. And Mr. Jones's story about the marriage was so moving and so compelling. There were tears in our eyes by the time he was done. And Dr. Hagzoltz looked at him and said, Mr. Jones, you are absolutely right. Now we're going to speak to your wife. And the wife came in, and by the time she was done telling her story about this marriage, she was so moving and so compelling that she brought tears to her eyes. And Dr. Hagzoltz said to her, Mrs. Jones, you're absolutely right. Now, Mr. Silver and I are going to discuss the case and we'll present our findings to you. And you have to imagine that I was going nuts listening to this guy because he's such an expert. And I said to him, Doctor, I've read your papers and your books. You're an authority on marriage. But you told Mr. Jones that he was right. You told Mrs. Jones she was right. They both can't be right. And he looked at me for a long minute and said, You're right.
Take it right from Goodwood.
Actually, when we start talking about how to deal with fair fighting, he actually was right. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. What would you say is the biggest emotion that people feel if they're in conflict? Anger. Now, if I asked you if you consider anger a tool, and I asked you what the purpose of that tool would be? Revenge? Could be. In which case, we have openings for individual counseling as well. If I held up a shovel, you would tell me the purpose of a shovel is to dig a hole, a hammer, drive a nail. But what's the purpose of anger?
To get your way.
To get your way. The purpose of anger is actually to change the situation that got us angry. And the truth is that when couples come to counseling, I already make a decision. It's an assumption that I check out, that each person is angry, but they're actually trying to change their partner. So what we really have is two people each trying to change the other person. Does that make sense? But in reflection, they're not trying to take any responsibility for changing themselves. When we get angry, our motivation is to fix the problem and change the other person. It's been my experience in working with couples for over 40 years that there are usually 4 families of conflict. And by the way, you could approach this issue from any relationship. It doesn't have to be husband and wife. The 4 families that we've regarded as traditional conflict issues, one will be decision making. And we make hundreds and hundreds of decisions every year. It's actually amazing to me that couples aren't fighting more often. So we'll often get in conflict over, are we going to get a pet, not get a pet? If so, what kind of pet? There'll be money. So the decision-making issues are a major conflict. Within that are 4 major areas of conflict. Money management. If you're younger in your marriage, child management, sex, and chores around the house. Actually, it's interesting. When I was in training, it was only 3. It was money, sex, and child management. Since women have gone to work outside the home, the issue of who does what around the house has become actually close to first. And it's fascinating because I've done workshops on chores around the house, and the women complain over and over again that they're not getting any help. But when I tell them I don't want them to get help, I want them to split the work up, they can't handle that. They insist that the job has to be done their way, which of course invites the husband not to do anything at all. So we have decision making as a major area of conflict, and we have those 4 topics within decision making. Another area of conflict is, I call it expectations not met. It's just that one person does something that ticks the other person off. You left the front door open, all the heat goes out, now they're arguing. You didn't call when you said you were going to call when you were late from work, now they're arguing. So we have decision making, and then we have expectations that are not lived up to. The third area that often people fight about are issues of boundaries. For example, us guys today, if we're lucky, we'll get the 1 o'clock game, the 4 o'clock game, the 8 o'clock game, and the Monday night game, and maybe the Thursday night game. And of course, we don't see anything wrong with that, but they do. And so we call that a boundary issue because he's needing space in order to engage in football, and she needs closeness so that she can nag him or go shopping or something. Often the boundary issue can be volume. When I was first married, my wife grew up in a home with her father needing a hearing aid but refused to get one. So she and her sister and her mother all compensated by being louder. TV, radio, volume of their voice. And I grew up in a home where if my mother got loud, I knew she was going to have a kind of a breakdown in a day or 2. and get violent. So I was very sensitive to loud, and my wife, of course, insisted that her volume was normal and appropriate. And when I told her, could you please lower your voice if we were having some kind of an engagement, her first statement would be, but I'm not loud. So volume itself can be a kind of a boundary issue. Sometimes pointing a finger could be a boundary issue, or standing over somebody could be a boundary issue. The fourth area that seems to be part of every conflict are issues of power and control. And there's where the anger comes in again. Almost every couple that's engaged in a fight wants to have control over the other person, but nobody wants to be controlled. So the typical fight tends to escalate. Therefore, I've created these 10 rules that I've handed out, and I've only handed out one to a table so you can kind of share, but I have some extras on the near the books, and I'll make sure Randy has a copy as well. So when people come and they want to work on their marriage and they want to work on their relationship, as long as nobody is really insane or actively addicted, these rules can apply to anybody. If a person is actively addicted to cocaine or alcohol, this can't work. If a person has a severe mental disorder, this can't work. But the biggest obstacle in rule number 1, which is that you have to decide to work it out, resolving and not winning, is that that's not why people come to counseling. They come to counseling to change the other person. And I have found people 10, 15 visits into their process of working together, they can't get past this first rule, which is they still want to win. In all candor, and I've been married over 40-some years, deep down inside where I really live, I want to win too. There's no part of me that wants to resolve anything or work it out. I want to win. So therefore, I have to have a little discussion with myself anytime there's any issue between my partner and myself, because I know that I've got to maintain the relationship and strengthen it, and therefore I have to give up my biological urge to win. If a couple can get past their insistence that they have to win and they're willing to work it out, the truth is nobody wants to work it out. They have to be willing to work it out. Then we have the next few rules that we teach people. One of the rules that we teach people is that you can't be insulting or violent to the partner that you're angry with. And by the way, anger is a part of this process. I'm not going to try to talk anybody out of being angry, but you can't insult another person. You can't put that person down, and you can't get violent. So in mental health, we have a rule. If you ask somebody to stop doing something, you have to have something to replace it. So if we teach people you can't put your partner down, what do you replace it with? You put the behavior down. So it wouldn't be, you're an idiot for bouncing that check. It would be, I'm angry that you bounced the check. No insults. And so one of the things that we teach people is you start your anger statement with the words, I feel, as opposed to you are. You are an idiot is an insult. I feel angry is not going to be considered an insult. By the way, any questions so far? Any thoughts? Sir?
Okay, these are general rules which are fantastic. But when you're in your practice, when you're addressing this with your clients, are you looking at their backgrounds from the standpoint of their religion, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, as well as where they come from economically? Is that a factor?
It's an essential factor. When we do an assessment for a new client or a couple coming in, we have to get a background evaluation, not just because of what you described, although the two major factors that influence the positives in a marriage will be socioeconomic class that's somewhat similar and the ability to do this. But we do look at background, and one of the backgrounds we look at is how did your parents fight? Because, for example, and I'm disclosing personal, I know as a kid growing up and watching my parents fight, I made a commitment to myself that I would never fight that way. And as a result of that, I made fighting worse. Because I kept everything in. So I had to learn this myself in order for us to have a proper conflict. But yes, the background information is essential in any assessment that we do in a mental health setting. So we're going to work this out as opposed to I'm going to win and you're going to lose. We can't insult each other. The third rule that you have is really difficult to adhere to, because when we traditionally fight the way we usually fight, we're convinced that I'm right and you're wrong. But going back to my little joke about Dr. Hogsaltz, we try to employ the idea that we're both right, that you have a point of view that differs from my point of view, but your point of view makes sense to you as much as my point of view makes sense to me. This is especially true, of course, if we're dealing with decision-making issues. So, if we both agree that we want a pet, but I want to get a dog, and she wants to get a cat, the reason she wants to get a cat will make so much sense to her that she's right. The fact that I have my reasons for wanting to get a dog, of course, makes sense to me, and I'm right. So we do away with the issue of who's right and who's wrong, and we try to celebrate the idea that we have differences that have to be worked out, which is our first rule. The harder issues about who's right and wrong are extremes. And if we go back to religious issues, for example, anything that's extreme is really hard to say there isn't a real absolute right or wrong. So you cannot say to an Orthodox Jew, you're not really right for insisting on keeping the kosher dietary laws. From that point of view, it's absolutely true. And you can't say to a Roman Catholic who doesn't want to use birth control that you're absolutely wrong. From their point of view, there's an absolute right or wrong. The secret of working out relationship issues is the ability to negotiate these differences. Let me say it again. The ability to negotiate differences is the way modern couples find success. This is something your great-grandparents and your grandparents did not have to deal with. Why? Somebody was in charge. Somebody was always right. So when we go back to the issue, the fourth family of conflict, which is power and control, anytime we're fighting over any issue, we're also fighting over who's going to have power. And your grandparents didn't have to deal with that. I observed my dad's parents, and he was in charge. The only thing he wasn't in charge with is the stuff he willingly gave up. So they didn't have to negotiate anything. The writers in our field believe that negotiation took place as a result of four strong variables. One, going back to the days that women got the vote. Now the power changed. World War II, Mary went into the factories. Rosie went into the factories. She had money in her pocket. Psychologically speaking, money always represents power. The writers also say it can represent love. So now that her husband comes back from the war and she's got power in her handbag, now things started to change. The advent of the birth control pill also shifted the balance of power in relationships. And lastly, just the women's liberation movement. So as a result of those four factors, women working especially, we have to learn to negotiate. So we have some rules for negotiation. And the most important rule after the first rule is which we have to work it out, is that in the old way of fighting, we used our words to fight, and we explained and justified our position, but the other person was doing the same thing. And in the traditional way of most of us fighting, we're talking a lot and we're not listening, because we're just loading up our next sentence while you're talking. We're rehearsing what we're going to say. So the most important ingredient in learning to negotiate is what we call active listening, or I've given you some rules about effective listening. And in my office, I use a metaphor called snowball catching. Snowball catching, it's on your list. So when we negotiate, picture your anger statements are like psychological snowballs. In the traditional way of fighting, if I'm angry with Marty and I throw a statement at him, I'm angry with you that you left the front door open and all the heat went out. Psychologically speaking, he's going to duck. Traditional way of fighting. And then he's going to throw some statement at me. I had my arms full. What did you expect from me? And I'm loading up my next sentence. But you could have gone back and closed the door. I forgot. Did you ever forget? And it just escalates over and over again. So we like to see an anger statement as like a psychological snowball, and instead of ducking, you catch it. So in catching it, or what we call effective listening or active listening, as much as you might be angry at your partner, you restate exactly what your partner is feeling and saying. So if I was angry with Marty because he left the front door open and all the heat went out, even though he has a beautiful excuse, I had my arms full and I got busy and I forgot, what would he say to me first?
I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll close it.
You forgot the most important statement. I understand that you're upset that okay? You make sure that you include the emotion in your statement. Does that make sense? When he does that to me, Ed, I understand that you were angry with me because I left the front door open. He can then say whatever he wants. I had my arms full. But the fact that he acknowledged me first lowers my anger if I'm a normal person. And deep down where all of us live, if we're acknowledged for what we're feeling, in childhood, one of the ways we build self-esteem is to be acknowledged for what we're feeling. So even though we're both grown-ups, we call it the psychological child within. By validating my emotion, my self-esteem goes up and my anger goes down. Does that make any sense?
But it only works one time.
Let me see if I understand you correctly. Are you saying to me it only works one time?
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, it's funny, we teach this actually with working with adolescents too, and I was working with a woman, I never saw her teenage daughter, but I taught her this active listening or snowball catching, and she came in a couple weeks later and she was smiling, and I said, what's so funny? And she said, I started to use active listening, we call it snowball catching, with my daughter, and she says, that's that stuff you're learning with your counselor. So she caught on. Active listening is the hardest thing for us to remember because we've been socialized all these years to simply defend ourselves or explain ourselves. What about if it's not a decision-making issue? It's not a decision that we're trying to arrive at. I'm just angry with you or you're just angry with me. That's where active listening still has to come in, even before the apology, Bob. The apology doesn't get heard too well if we don't do the active listening first. Any questions about that? Sir?
Doesn't it get harder as you get older? At least I find it to be an active listener. That way you're saying, you know, if you're married 34 years, it's too late. But isn't that true? Isn't that a factor?
Old dogs can't learn new tricks? I haven't found that to be true. If you're really motivated to work on it. Anybody else?
Have you ever thought about presenting this to Congress?
You know, it's funny that you say that because supposedly the art of politics is to the ability to negotiate. But you have to be willing to. What? Yes? Rabbi?
How did you diffuse that woman whose daughter figured out that she was doing active listening?
I actively listened to her, and I suggested that was fine. That just because the person knows you're doing it doesn't defeat the purpose of negotiating. Because when I have a couple working on active listening, they each know they're doing it. And in the beginning, each one knows they're following a script, that it's not yet in here, it's more up here. But it eventually becomes part of here.
That's the obstacle that I often find in counseling people is that they pick it up and they say, I know the game, or I know what it is, or it's not sincere, or stop patronizing me, things like that.
And so what I'll do is actively listen, and I'll say to that person, you know, I could see that it bothers you, that you feel patronized, that you don't really feel sincere in getting what you're getting from your partner. But I can promise you, if you two keep rehearsing it, it will become sincere. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, so it's just practice until you get it.
Yeah, and the willingness to do it. Now, there are a couple of rules that we also wrote down for you, that if you don't adhere to these rules, the negotiation will not. One of the hardest things for us to do is to stay in the now. Some of us, when there's anger, will dig up the past. Traditionally, the person who digs up the past is the person who's got a lot of unresolved angers, or at the moment that they're digging up the past, they just want to unload on their partner. So if I forgot to mail the mortgage payment this month, and my partner not only reminds me that I forgot to mail the mortgage payment, but I forgot to pick up the cats last month at the vet, and before that I got the wrong date on picking up her parents at the airport, it's either unresolved that she never fixed when she originally had the angers, or she just wants to unload. So what we're teaching that person is stay in the now. There is one time that you're allowed to dig up the past, and that's if you're going to change the decision. So for example, if I keep forgetting to mail the mortgage payment, what would a good negotiation be?
Hey, the house, you do it.
She will do it, but I would do something else. So when I was a young man, I was the one who used to make the lunches for the kids. We had a couple dogs, and one of them was very clever, that if I made the lunches, now my wife is gone, the kids are at school, I'm ready to leave, and if the bread drawer, if you closed it too hard, it would open up just about 2 inches. And the dogs would get into the bread drawer after I left. And when my wife got home, and I used to work late, when my wife got home, she would find all kinds of mess all over the house, including they lost the control of their bowels. She was obviously very authentic in her anger toward me. And of course, what would my mission be when it's not a decision-making issue, it's just she's angry over something I did. What would my job be?
Clean up, do it again.
Snowball catch. I have to acknowledge first. I couldn't clean up because I got home at 11 o'clock at night. She had already cleaned up at 4 in the afternoon. So my mission, of course, is to snowball catch and promise to be careful. Except a couple of months later, I did it again. And then a couple months later, I did it again. So at this point, when she digs up the past, we're changing the decision. So the decision we arrived at is to keep the bread in the refrigerator. But we could have decided on a number of things. She would make lunches. She would leave a little yellow stick-em notes. But the decision we arrived at was to keep the bread in the refrigerator. I did close the drawer, but it bounced. Fix the drawer. That would have been another decision.
And not a major one. Most of the decisions, they sound petty, but in reality they're not. I mean, they sound like very minor stuff. But what is it to kind of build up if you don't lose some of these?
Well, it's a good point. When I was in training, it wasn't Dr. Hogzalt, they said, you're going to see issues about infidelity and alcoholism and gambling, but you're going to see more and more issues of what he called toothpaste caps and toilet seats. That they can make big deals over something that we consider minor. Sir.
What about the issue of envy? When Mary's husband does this, and does this, and you do nothing.
Well, if you talk about the chores around the house, whether it's envy or not, that's a whole area about those. Remember the decision-making, there are 4 areas, chores around the house? So we could teach you negotiation about that.
Well, it could be Mary's husband always opens the door for her.
Okay? If the person snowball catches the wife and says, all right, so it's important, you feel more cared about if I would open the door for you, he might be willing to do that. If it's more that, Mary's husband does, painting outside the home and takes the kids to all kinds of activities, and maybe he can or won't. Everything is negotiable except the extremes. Okay. Envy could be a big factor individually as well. We consider envy not a very good mental health position to take. Another rule that if you, yes, sir.
Just a quickie. One of the things I don't see down in here, but I guess loosely speaking, is grudge holding.
Say it again.
Is grudge holding.
Okay.
And it may be a loose corollary of what's on there, but do you find in your practice that women necessarily maybe a little bit more grudge holding on average than men?
I find grudge holding an issue that has to be worked on. I've never seen it gender specific. Grudge holding, of course, is another form of anger. Now, it could also be those who dig up the past or don't let go of the past. And of course, that could be worked on. It's a negotiable issue. Okay. There's an expression we often use in my office. I quote the Sicilian proverb, those who keep a grudge dig 2 graves.
Say it again.
Those who hold a grudge dig 2 graves.
And this isn't a wife but a relative. She comes out and tells you she's always right. How do you deal with that?
You make an appointment with me. You take these rules home and you say, I understand that you believe you're always right, so therefore I must be angering you quite a bit. However, Ed Silver in his presentation said that I'm also right.
I'll tell her.
gonna hit you.
Then you'll be angry it isn't.
Another rule that we try to stay away from and not break is changing the subject. Now, the person who changes the subject is usually the person receiving an anger statement. So, for example, if I was angry at Marty because he left the front door open and all the heat went out, and he's uncomfortable with my anger toward him, the snowball coming at him, and he ducks, and he throws his snowball by changing the subject, and he may say, and what about the time you forgot to fill the car with gasoline and we broke down without gas? If I'm angry with Dave Swartz because he spent $600 on golf clubs and he throws his snowball, and how much did you lose at the casino last month? So changing the subject is a very good way of getting off the hot seat, but all it does is make the marriage or the relationship more difficult to deal with. The only time that we accept the idea of changing the subject if you break any of the 10 rules. So in other words, if Gary and I are in a relationship and he puts me down, I'm allowed to change the subject and remind him that he just put me down, and that's breaking the second rule. Okay. There's a concept here called avoiding the yawn principle, and really what this means, it's a metaphor that often we get angry not over what a person did, but why we think the person did it. We assign motivation. So I might be angry at my wife for refusing to, I don't know, do something, and she might say to me, I might say to her, and I know, the only reason you're still angry with me is I didn't want your sister to come to the barbecue. In other words, I assign a motivation. So the rule is, if you have an assumption as to why people are doing what they do, you have to check it out, not live it out. Another rule that we have is, it's a power issue. You often see it more with parents than with husband and wife. Sometimes people ask a question that they already know the answer to, and it's a setup for more conflict. So I had a client one time who, her husband went to a strip club but had told his wife he was working late. And she found out through a neighbor whose husband had met the other guy at the strip club. And she said, the night that you were working late, where were you? And of course she knew the answer. So now that she's going to be angry that he went to a strip club, she's going to be angry that he lied. So when you don't ask, you just say it. I'm really upset I found out that you were at Delilah's den that night. Okay. And often what can magnify conflict is people have, especially women, if you want to know about gender, we have our needs to be met in relationships, but sometimes if you don't get that need met, guys will often say, I shouldn't have to tell you what I need, and women will see it as, if I don't get what I need, you really don't love me. And you'll hear words like, if you really loved me, and we want to get rid of that, because I can love you deeply and still forget your birthday. I can remember your birthday and hate your guts. So they shouldn't even have any of that. We're out of time, so I also gave you a list of effective listening techniques, or techniques that will interfere with effective listening.
I do have one question. Well, I have many questions, but this shall maybe my pet peeve. We want to do something, and you solicit suggestions, and the response is, you make the decision. When what you're trying to do is do something that the other person wants to do rather than force them to do something that you want to do, how do you get around that dynamic?
Number one, I know we're having short of time. You take the position that she's as right as you are. So therefore, if she's really saying, I feel more cared about when you take leadership, then you can throw your snowball and say, I'll take leadership, but I feel very uncomfortable if I make a decision that you don't like. If I make that decision and you don't like it, are you going to be able to live with it? Okay? Or she might say, get to know me more and you'll know what I like. So all of this is negotiable. Last question.
Yeah, in regard to that, other things, I have noticed that women are intuitive. They seem to know what the other person wants, whereas men have to be direct. If men want to know something, they talk about it. Women seem to, by action or something like that, understand what other women want. And how does that affect the relationships?
Well, if you read the Mars-Venus book, there are about 30 or 40 differences between the genders. All of them are workable if you start to work toward them together. And it's an excellent book to read. John Gray's Men Are from Mars. It's an excellent book. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you for all that you do, but in particular for an excellent presentation today. We really do appreciate it.
Not only that, I was the one who got these printed up.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you, it's great.
That was very good, thank you.
Ed, you want to take the
Oh. Oh.
I already did it for you.
$41 is half, 82 is correct.
That book didn't go around with Dave's.
Oh, yeah, please sign up for November 17th. What's up?
What's our numbers, Dave? Our winning numbers?
375.
Yes.
I-49.
Okay, the winning number is 3755551.
Oh, wait a minute.
3755551. That looks like a match.
Wow.
You get that to put on your wall, and you get that
Thank
to
you,
spend.
sir. I say thank you.
Anything else for the good order? Jerry?
I haven't.
No.
Never.
I think my wife knows all these things.
I can't.
We're talking if anybody else has something to say. So.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Guys, one other thing, hold on. Jerry has something, Jerry. I'm sorry. Here's Jerry.
Good job, Don. Thank you. One last thing, everybody.
Guys.
In international politics, the Obama administration is getting set to release $12 billion to Iran in appreciation for all they've done to lessen their preparation for getting a nuclear bomb. At the same time, the United Nations has said that Iran is ever closer to getting a bomb. As a matter of fact, if they wanted to, they could have a bomb within 60 days. Yet Obama has suddenly decided that with the new Iranian president, that the verbiage is getting a little better, and he wants to reward them for their better verbiage. Not better actions, just better verbiage. Therefore, he's releasing $12 billion of Iranian assets. So I just wanted you all to be aware of it. At the same time, Netanyahu has been very vocal that they are reserving all their options, now recognizing that he's essentially lost America in support of opposing Iran. It is more and more possible that something happens, that Israel does something, because they see no other alternative. So, it's all right.
Thank you. Didn't know that. Thank you. Anybody else? Gentlemen, thank you. Yeah, I gotta get to the family thing.
You gotta get home now, or?
Well,